Hello again. So I had a request to do some winter themed drawings and I thought I'd share a tutorial that isn't overly Christmassy. I think when we think of winter florals, the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is probably holly or poinsettias, and if I'm going to be honest, neither are my favorite to draw. Who knows, maybe I'll be feeling festive in a few weeks and draw some poinsettias, but for now we're going to draw some Anenome blooms, greenery, and some evergreen branches. For this drawing you'll need some paper. I'm using a Strathmore watercolor paper here. You'll also need a good quality eraser like this kneadable eraser, a sketching pencil, and a fine line black pen. I'm using my favorite pen here, which is the Sakura of America Micron in size 03. To get started, grab your pencil and let's start sketching out a rough draft of your design. If you're going to sketch along with me, I want you to know that this piece took me about 45 minutes to draw, but I sped up parts for this video. Feel free to pause where you need some time or take advantage of the chapters that I've added to the video so you can go back to certain sections as needed. I'm just drawing out a really simple draft of where I want the elements of this piece to be, starting with a couple large circles which will become some anemone blooms. I like to add the largest elements first and work around them. I've added a couple of leaves toward the bottom of the page, and I'm adding a rough sketch of where I'll add some evergreen branches. To the top left, you'll see an oval shape that I added, and this is going to become a little pine cone. As I was looking at the overall shape of this piece, I decided I wanted to add in some smaller blooms for some contrast, so I just sketched in 2 small circles to show where I'll add those in afterwards. This is all that I'm going to add for the rough draft because I don't like adding in too many details during this part of the drawing. Next, we'll start inking in the outlines of the piece. I use the same process almost every time I draw like this. A light sketch followed by an outline in ink, then finally I'll come in and add the small details that really make the piece pop. Think of it like you're building up from the easiest or most basic element of the piece to the most intricate. Anenome flowers have a really bold center mound of anthers, which I'm drawing with these really tiny circles here. I'm just layering the circle shapes together until I fill up the full center. Once I have the anthers drawn, I'm going to start adding a halo of tiny ovals around it, which make up the stamen. We're eventually going to attach these back to the center with a quick line, but I want to keep this open for now until we've drawn in the petals. Try to layer in the ovals around without having them look too perfect. There can be gaps in the halo you're creating. Some parts can be thicker than other parts. Don't worry about it. These imperfections will help the flower look more lifelike. Now we're going to start adding in some petals. I'm not going to worry too much about the shape of the petals, but I do want you to make sure that the bottom of the petals connects back to the center. Start with a few smaller U-shaped petals around the center and then work around the outer layers by adding in some curved lines to create the illusion of layers of petals. You can create some more movement within your petals by adding a few folds. See how I did this by just adding in an extra line alongside some of the dips and curves in the petals? Once we add in some details, shadow lines, these petals will really start to pop off the page. I'm happy with the shape of the flowers here and how full we've made them, so now I'm going to add in the lines I mentioned before to connect the stamen back to the center of the flower. Don't worry about having every single oval connected to a line. As long as the general area is filled in, it will look great. The next thing we'll start working on here are the leaves. I didn't draw the leaves that are unique to the anemone flower here because I wanted to have some more bold leaves for this piece. I have a rose bush in my yard and the leaves are still nice and green even though it's almost winter here, and I love the shape of them. They're a rounded leaf with a jagged or toothed edge. You want to draw two parallel lines for the center vein of the leaf, surrounded by a curved, jagged line on either side of the vein to create the outer edges. Have fun drawing the leaves. They can all be different shapes and sizes. If you want to make some of your leaves have a smoother outer edge, go ahead and add less of a tooth to the line like I'm doing here with the large ones. Any of these variances that you add will just add more interest to the piece once it's done. The next element that I'm working on here is this little baby pine cone in the top left corner. Let's keep things really simple here by just layering together some diamond or triangular shapes to fill up the oval. Just keep laying these diamonds in until you filled up the full oval shape. You can make the shapes on the outer edges a little more narrow to help create the effect that the pine cone is curved here. Now let's add in some pine needles. Actually, I think it's a fir branch that has these little clusters of long needles like this. So make a stem with a bit of a wider tip where the needles will stem from, and create a few needles by drawing two parallel lines that connect together at the tip. They can have a very subtle curve to them as well. The lines don't need to be perfectly straight here. Okay, let's come in and trace out the needles on the second fir branch here, and then we'll move on to the evergreen sprigs on the right side of the piece. Instead of the needles all stemming from one spot on the branch here, they're going to come out of the full length of the center vein or branch. Make these needles a bit shorter than the fir needles, but draw them in the same way with 2 parallel lines that connect together at the tip. Once all of the needles are drawn here, you can trace over the outer edges of the branch, and then we'll move on to the tiny flowers at the bottom. I think I'm going to just create a little tiny 5-petal flower here, kind of like a Japanese anemone or windflower. The center is started out the same way that we started out the center of the large anemone bloom in the beginning, by just layering several tiny circles together to create the circle shape. Then we're just going to add in 5 small petals around the stamen. You can create some folds in the leaves here if you want by adding a small diamond shape that connects back to the center with 2 lines just like I did here. Add in the stems of the flowers just to connect them back into the bulk of this bouquet, and then we'll start outlining the last few small leaves we have here. I have these branches with little red berries growing up a section of the fence in my backyard, and I just love the shape of the leaves. They have a toothed edge, but it's really small and subtle. So for these leaves, I'm just creating 2 parallel lines running close together for the stem and a line for the vein up the center of each leaf, and then I'm adding in a curved outer edge that has a subtle tooth by just wiggling my pen a little bit as I draw the line. We'll finish up the last one here, and then we can outline that final little fir sprig at the bottom to balance things out. And there you have it, the outline is complete and we're ready to start adding some details to this piece. Now, this part appears to be the most complex of the steps, but really we're going to keep things really simple here. Starting with the petals of the large anemone blooms again, we're going to start adding some details. Try to focus the detail lines to the bottom of the petals or where there may be a shadow. Just try to envision where the petals may be a bit darker, like under the folds or toward the base of the petals where they meet the stamen. Keep working around the bloom until each petal has a few lines along the base or under any folds. You'll notice that I also added a few broken lines up the length of some of the petals just to help to create a bit of dimension, but I'm keeping things sparse. I'm a firm believer that less is more when you're adding in these details. For the little bottom blooms, let's do the same thing. Keep the line work concentrated toward where the petals meet the center of the flower. Sorry, I got a bit out of focus here for a second, but I think you get the general idea of just adding a few intentionally placed lines for each petal. Next, let's work on these larger leaves here. I'm going to draw again a very subtle S-curve line for the center vein outwards toward the edge, and then continue following this shape all the way down the length of the leaf on both sides. You can draw some solid lines and some broken lines. By adding some broken lines, you'll end up with a bit of white space in the leaves, which makes it look like the light is hitting those places, and it'll help to add some dimension to the leaves. Let's work on the second large leaf here in the same way with that subtle S-curve line down the length of the leaf until the full thing is filled in on both sides. Next, I'll move on to the smaller leaves that are inspired by those rose leaves that I have on the top of the screen there. Just add parallel lines on a slant running down the length of the leaf on either side of the vein. Don't worry about having your lines perfectly spaced or perfectly straight. You can add a bit of a curve here if you want to, but I'm just keeping them straight to keep things easy and have a bit of contrast between these leaves and the larger ones that we created with the S-curve. Next, I'll add some detail lines to the smallest leaves by just drawing some quick light lines that stem from the center vein outward toward the edges. You can have some of the lines reach all the way to the outer edge or leave some white space at the edges. I'm leaving a bit of white space here again just to help add a bit of interest and dimension to the piece. The last thing that we have to do here is add a few shadow lines to the pine cone. Just add some quick lines at the base of each of those diamond shapes that we drew to create a shadow, and you can add a few lines around the top of the diamond as well if you want to create a bit of a curve. Keep the lines simple and clean. Once the lines are drawn here, all we have left to do now is erase the pencil lines that are left behind. I'm using this kneadable eraser. They're probably my favorite kind of eraser because you don't have to rub too hard to lift away the pencil, and can even just dab the eraser a bit on the page if you want to be extra careful with your ink lines, and the pencil will still lift away. Also, they don't leave behind those pesky eraser crumbs, which is really nice. So once the pencil lines are erased, we've finished another piece. Winter-inspired florals with greenery and evergreen sprigs ready to frame. I hope you enjoyed watching this video or drawing along with me today. Let me know in the comments how your drawing turned out, or feel free to send me a picture on Instagram. I'd love to see what you've created. And until next time, bye-bye.